Ma'am, I need to ask you to move to the back. These seats aren't for people like you. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp, cutting like ice down the spine. And in that moment, the entire first-class cabin froze. Not a word, not a whisper, just the thick, electric silence of judgment hanging in the air. A black woman in a mustard-yellow sweater sat stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. Next to her, an 8-year-old boy slowly turned his head toward the flight attendant. A child, but with the expression of someone far older. Someone who had seen this before. The attendant held a laminated seat chart like it was a badge of authority. But it wasn't the paper that held the power. It was what happened next. The boy stood, small hands clenched, voice calm, but every syllable hit like thunder. "Excuse me, but that's not what the law says." His voice carried through the cabin, not loud, but clear. The kind of clarity that demanded attention. The kind that forced even the man in seat 2A to lower his noise-canceling headphones. The kind that made the baby in the back row stop crying. According to Title 14, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 38, 2.87, my mother has the legal right to sit here. Her oxygen concentrator is a medical device, and your airline is required to accommodate her under federal law. The flight attendant blinked. Passengers turned. Mouths opened. Phones came out. But the boy wasn't done. He reached into his dinosaur print backpack, pulled out a folded document, and held it up with both hands, like a shield. "Would you like to review the regulations, or shall I explain them to your supervisor when we land?" Everyone stared. Who was this kid? How did he know all this? And what happened that led to this moment? A child standing alone at 35,000 feet, defending his mother with nothing but knowledge and courage. To understand how we got here, we have to go back just 48 hours before Flight 2819 left Newark International, and meet the boy who didn't just know the rules, he knew how to use them. 48 hours earlier, in a modest brownstone apartment in East Orange, New Jersey, the air was thick with spring humidity and something else: worry. Danielle Harris sat hunched over her aging laptop at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee by her side. The pale blue light from the screen reflected in her eyes as she read the message again. Her sister had written it only minutes ago. "Mom's in the ICU again. Stage 4. The doctors say she doesn't have long, Danny. You need to come. Bring Isaiah. She's asking for both of you." Danielle pressed her lips together, fighting the wave rising in her chest. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain, unwilling. She hadn't spoken to her mother in almost 3 years. Not since the argument. Not since the day her mother said she had failed as a wife and ruined Isaiah's chances by leaving Marcus. And yet, in the quiet apartment, with only the hum of the fridge and the distant echo of car horns outside, she could hear her mother's voice in her mind. Strong women don't walk away, they endure. But Danielle had walked away. For her son. For herself. Across the room, curled up on the couch with a book that looked far too advanced for someone his age, was Isaiah. 8 years old, barefoot, glasses slipping down his nose, and reading, of all things, a hardcover law encyclopedia. He looked up as if sensing her stare. "Is Grandma dying?" he asked plainly. Danielle blinked. "Baby, Isaiah closed the book and walked over, standing beside her like a tiny professor. "You know, you can't lie to me, Mom. I already looked up the prognosis for metastatic pancreatic cancer. The 5-year survival rate is below 10%. Danielle let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You've got to stop Googling everything." "But I was right," he said, then added softly, "Wasn't I?" She nodded, finally. He climbed into her lap, wrapping his arms around her neck. Despite his encyclopedic mind, he was still a little boy who needed comfort. "Do you want to see her?" she whispered into his curls. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Not because she was always nice, but because she's your mom, and because I think I need to say goodbye properly." Danielle held him tighter. 2 hours later, after calling out of work and booking a one-way flight to Dallas, she watched her son pack his little suitcase with a seriousness that didn't match his age. 4 law books, a printed copy of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a folder labeled Air Travel Regulations, and, for some reason, a single stuffed dinosaur. When she asked about it, he looked her in the eye and said, "Even great minds need emotional support, Mom." She didn't argue. That night, while Danielle tried and failed to sleep, Isaiah sat cross-legged on the floor, memorizing sections of the Air Carrier Access Act. "Just in case," he said. "Just in case of what?" she asked. He looked up. "You never know when someone will need help understanding what fairness actually means." And she realized her son wasn't just smart. He wasn't just precocious. He was preparing for something bigger. He always had been. He wasn't looking for trouble. But if trouble showed up in the form of injustice, prejudice, or ignorance, he'd be ready. He would be the calm voice, the steady hand, the one who stood up, even if he had to stand alone. The morning of the flight, Newark Liberty International buzzed with the usual mix of chaos and monotony, rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, half-finished coffees, and faces either weary or wired. But in Gate C-18, something quieter was building. Danielle checked in early, clutching Isaiah's hand as he navigated the airport like a seasoned traveler. TSA cleared them faster than expected. Isaiah had pre-packed all liquids into Ziploc bags and corrected a fellow traveler who didn't remove his laptop during screening. "Section 3B of TSA guidelines, sir," Isaiah said politely, and the man gave a bemused chuckle before complying. Danielle shook her head. "Do you want to work for the TSA now?" "I just want people to follow the rules," Isaiah said, as if that were the most obvious answer in the world. At the gate, the airline staff were calling for early boarding for passengers who needed assistance. Danielle approached to ask about bringing her portable oxygen concentrator on board, a compact unit she'd been prescribed for anxiety-induced breathing irregularities. Not mandatory, but helpful. The gate agent glanced at it, nodded, and waved them through with barely a glance. What no one knew yet was that the moment would come back like a boomerang. On board, the plane smelled of recycled air, coffee, and too much cologne. Isaiah and Danielle found their seats, 3A and 3B, business class. Not first, but certainly not coach. Danielle had used the last of her miles to upgrade, a small comfort for a hard journey ahead. Isaiah took the window seat, gaze locked on the tarmac, watching the luggage carts zigzag like mechanical ants. His dinosaur backpack rested under the seat. Inside, a travel-sized copy of the Constitution, highlighters, and a folder labeled Civil Rights in Transit. Danielle adjusted her seatbelt and leaned back, exhausted already. That's when the first crack in the calm appeared. A man in his late 50s, in a charcoal suit, brushed past and stopped cold upon seeing Danielle. His eyes flicked to her oxygen device, then to her skin. He blinked slowly, as if recalibrating what he thought he was seeing. Then he whispered to the flight attendant standing beside him, loud enough for Isaiah to hear. "She's not in the wrong seat?" The attendant gave a tight smile. "She's listed here, sir." His lips pursed. Isaiah's eyes narrowed, watching, listening. Across the aisle, a woman tapped rapidly on her phone. The couple behind them laughed at something on their iPad. The plane was full. Normal. But Isaiah felt it, like how animals sense a storm before it hits. And he was right. 15 minutes into boarding, the plane door still open, a second flight attendant approached their row. Her name tag read Cynthia. Her tone was cheerful, her smile tight. "Ma'am," she said to Danielle, "we've had a seat reassignment due to a last-minute status change. I'm going to ask you to move to the rear of the plane." Danielle blinked. "I'm sorry?" "We need to accommodate another passenger with specific medical requirements. You'll still have a window seat, I promise." Isaiah sat up straight. "She has a medical device, too," he said. Calm. Matter of fact. Cynthia gave him a look. "I was speaking to your mother, young man." Isaiah didn't flinch. "And I'm speaking on her behalf. Under 14 CFR Section 382.87, no passenger can be reassigned solely due to medical equipment, especially if pre-approved by gate staff." The row behind them went silent. Danielle looked from her son to the attendant, unsure who was in control of the moment. Cynthia blinked. "What did you say?" Isaiah reached down, unzipped his backpack, and pulled out the exact regulation, printed, highlighted. He handed it to her. "This," he said, "is the law." Cynthia stood there, frozen, the brightly laminated regulation trembling slightly in her hand. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had stopped. The murmur of boarding passengers, the rustle of overhead bins, even the hum of the jet engine, all dulled beneath the weight of a single sheet of paper held by an 8-year-old boy. "This must be a misunderstanding," Cynthia said quickly, her smile now fraying at the edges. "We don't allow printed materials from passengers to override internal procedures." Isaiah didn't blink. "But it's not just printed material. It's federal law. Your airline policy cannot violate that." Cynthia's face flushed. Whether from embarrassment or anger, no one could tell. She opened her mouth, but was interrupted by a calm baritone from behind. "Excuse me. I'd like to see that." It was the man in 3D, an older gentleman in a gray blazer with a U.S. Department of Transportation lapel pin glinting on his collar. Charles W. Denning, a retired regulatory attorney, as fate would have it. He'd been reading The New Yorker in silence. Until now. Cynthia hesitated, then handed the document to him. He read it carefully, line by line. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, then looked up at Isaiah. "You're not wrong, son. You even cited the 2019 revision. Most lawyers would have missed that." Isaiah gave a small nod, like it was just another homework assignment. Danielle, still in shock, gripped her armrest. Her son, her little boy, was taking on a multi-billion-dollar airline at 35,000 feet, and he was winning. The woman seated across the aisle began filming with her phone. Someone 2 rows back whispered, "What's going on?" The flight crew now looked visibly tense. "Cynthia," Charles continued, gently but firmly, "I suggest you get your lead attendant and your captain now." Cynthia hesitated, then turned and walked briskly toward the front of the plane. Isaiah leaned over to his mom and whispered, "They're going to ask questions. Don't say anything. Let the truth do the talking." Danielle nodded slowly, heart pounding. 2 minutes later, the lead flight attendant, an older man named Greg, arrived with a clipboard and a no-nonsense attitude. He scanned the document, glanced at Charles, then looked at Isaiah. "You printed this?" he asked. Isaiah nodded. "Double-sided. It saves paper." There was a pause. Then Greg sighed and looked to Danielle. "Ma'am, we apologize. There was clearly an internal error. You're free to remain in your seat." Cynthia reappeared, standing awkwardly behind him. But it wasn't over. "And?" Isaiah prompted. Greg blinked. "Excuse me?" "An apology," Isaiah said, now standing. "My mother was embarrassed, in front of strangers, on a plane, for following the rules. She deserves an apology." The cabin was silent again. Cynthia's face paled. She glanced at Greg, who gave her a look that said, "Do it." She stepped forward, voice low. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to cause discomfort." Danielle simply nodded. But Isaiah? He stood tall. "Thank you. I accept your apology. But remember next time, silence in the face of wrong is also wrong." There it was, the line that made the cabin stop breathing. Phones were now filming in every direction. A businessman clapped once, then another, and another. Soon, the entire cabin was applauding, not just for the boy, but for what he stood for: fairness, truth, and the courage to speak, even when your voice is small. The applause eventually faded, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, the kind that clings to the skin and stays with you long after the moment has passed. Danielle sat quietly, her hands trembling in her lap. She wasn't sure whether it was adrenaline or pride. Maybe both. Her son, her Isaiah, had turned a moment of quiet injustice into something unforgettable, not with rage, not with anger, but with precision and principle. She looked over at him. He had already returned to his seat, buckled up, and was now calmly flipping through the final pages of The Rights of the Passenger. "Mom," he said without looking up, "when we land, you should write a formal letter to the airline. I'll draft it if you want." Danielle let out a soft laugh, tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. Deal. The plane took off shortly after. The rest of the flight was uneventful, except for the constant glances from other passengers. Some nodded respectfully at Isaiah. One woman, seated 2 rows back, leaned forward and whispered to Danielle, "He reminded me of Thurgood Marshall. I used to teach civil rights law. Your son has something rare." Danielle nodded, smiling through misty eyes. "He's had it since the day he was born." About halfway through the flight, a flight attendant approached quietly. A new one, not Cynthia. She crouched next to Isaiah's seat and handed him a small envelope. "From the captain," she whispered. Inside was a handwritten note. "To Master Isaiah Harris, thank you for reminding us what true leadership looks like. Never stop using your voice. We need more of it in the sky and on the ground." Beneath it, Captain Julia Martinez Isaiah read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it back in his backpack like it was part of the Constitution. Meanwhile, the woman across the aisle, the one who had been filming, was already uploading the clip to social media. She captioned it, "8-year-old legal genius stops injustice, mid-flight. Watch to the end. Isaiah, Harris, know your rights." By the time the plane touched down in Dallas, the video had over 28,000 views. By the time they exited the terminal, it had over 200,000. And by the next morning, Isaiah's name was trending on Twitter. Journalists reached out. Civil rights groups reposted the video. A famous TV host tweeted, "This kid has more courage and clarity than half our Congress." Danielle's inbox was flooded. Interviews, guest appearances, invitations to youth leadership summits. But Isaiah, he didn't care about going viral. He cared about justice, about words that matter, about doing the right thing, even when you're the smallest voice in the room. At the baggage claim, Charles W. Denning, the retired attorney, found them again. He handed Isaiah his business card. "You have a future," he said simply. Isaiah looked at the card, then back up at Charles. "So do you," he replied. "Everyone still breathing has one?" Charles laughed. "Touché." They shook hands. No cameras caught that moment. No reporters hovered. But that quiet handshake between a boy and a lawyer meant more than any headline. It was the ripple, the one that would keep traveling long after the plane had landed. The hospital smelled like bleach, old air vents, and quiet endings. Danielle and Isaiah moved through the hallways of St. Mary's Medical Center with the weariness of travelers who had seen too much in one day and still weren't done. Room 417 was at the end of the south wing. The nurse met them at the door. "She's still awake," she whispered gently. "But not for long." Danielle nodded, her voice caught somewhere between her throat and her chest. Isaiah stood next to her, unusually silent. In his hand, he clutched the same envelope the pilot had written in, not for bragging, but for strength. They stepped inside. Margaret Harris, Danielle's mother, Isaiah's grandmother, lay surrounded by machines that beeped in rhythms, too slow to be comforting. Her skin had lost its glow, her hair a halo of silver against the white pillow. She turned her head slowly, and for a long moment, no one said anything. Then came the softest smile. "You came." Danielle stepped forward first. Her hands were shaking. "Mama, Shh," Margaret whispered. "Don't waste your breath on apologies. I already forgave you the moment you left." Danielle gasped. "I was angry," her mother continued. "Not at you, at the world, at myself. But I knew you did what you had to, and you raised him." Her eyes shifted to Isaiah. "Brilliantly." Isaiah approached the bed without hesitation. He stood beside his grandmother, looking her in the eye like an equal. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. Margaret smiled again. "I saw you on the news." Isaiah tilted his head. "I didn't mean to go viral. I just wanted them to know the rules." "You reminded them," she said, "that rules only matter when they protect people. And you protected your mother. That's legacy, baby." Tears rolled down Danielle's cheeks. Isaiah reached into his bag and pulled out something unexpected. Not a law book, not a document, a photo. It was of Danielle, Margaret, and a baby Isaiah, taken nearly a decade ago on a park bench in springtime. Danielle hadn't even known he'd packed it. "I brought this," Isaiah said. So you don't forget who we were before all the arguing." Margaret's hand, thin and trembling, reached out and touched the photo. "I never forgot." The machines beeped slower now. "I'm proud of you," she said to both of them. "Tell the truth, even when it's hard. Speak gently, but never back down. That's our way." Danielle leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently against her mother's. "I love you, Mama." Margaret's eyes fluttered. "Then I did something right." And with that, her chest rose once, then fell, and did not rise again. Danielle wept softly. Isaiah stood still, not afraid, not broken, just present. After a moment, he spoke. "She left us with words. Strong ones." Danielle nodded through tears. "Yes, baby. And we'll carry them." Outside the hospital, the sun was setting. But to Isaiah, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like a beginning. 2 weeks after the flight, Isaiah sat in his third-grade classroom at Jefferson Elementary. Life had mostly returned to normal, or so it seemed. His teacher, Ms. Franklin, called him to the front one morning. "Isaiah, would you mind staying after class for a moment?" When the bell rang and the other kids stormed out, Ms. Franklin handed Isaiah a folded piece of paper. "Some of the teachers saw your video. The school board did too. They want to start a new student initiative. Something about knowing your rights?" Isaiah blinked. "Like a club?" "More like a movement," she said, smiling. "And they want you to lead it." Isaiah looked down, thoughtful, then nodded. "Okay," he said, "but only if we call it the Quiet Voice Project, because some kids think they need to be loud to matter." Ms. Franklin nodded. "That's a perfect name." Outside the window, the flag fluttered in the wind. Inside, a boy just realized his words didn't land on that plane. They were still flying.